It is Monday, September the 27th, 2021, and I'm Jimmy Lynn Ramseur, and I have the pleasure to interview Mike Engle, or Joseph Michael Engle, as he's formally known. Thank you for agreeing to do this, Mike.
Certainly.
We're going to talk some today about your whole life. I kidded you about, This Is Your Life, the old show that we used to have. But I want to highlight some of the things interesting things you told me about when you were growing up that I think are worth showing to other people and sharing with them. So I believe you were born in 1945 in Charleston, West Virginia. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you had a large church influence in your life when you were growing up. Is that right?
Very much so, yes.
And so just a little bit, tell us about that. What was that?
Multiple generations of my grandfathers on the paternal side have been Methodist ministers, tracing their ordination back to Francis Asbury, believe it or not.
Wow, that does go back.
My father was the firstborn of his generation who did not go in the ministry. I am, on the next generation, the firstborn of that generation who did not go into the ministry. My father, however, was extremely active in the church.
As are you.
He was in 3 general conferences Methodist conferences representing 3 different jurisdictions. He was lay leader in the church. His name is inscribed off the side of a building there.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
So the Methodist Church is deep in your roots, as they say.
Oh, yeah, very much so.
And you continue on. You're active at Belmont United Methodist Church here in Nashville. But you also are active in a bunch of social justice organizations, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that as it goes on. But I assume that your activities in those are connected, perhaps, to your education and young childhood. Is that right?
Well, they're more than connected. They're sort of the same thing. I don't see there being a legal justice and a social justice or a scriptural justice as being different things.
There's just justice.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that was part of your upbringing, and,
It was, yes.
What you learned as a child, and also that you learned in high school and college.
Yes.
I believe that you were involved a lot in church camps.
Yeah, very much so. Yes.
And did you? I think you told me you also gave some tuba lessons. Is that right?
So, well, yeah. I got bored my senior year in high school, and so I only needed 1 credit my whole senior year, and so I used to wander over to. I'd go over to the band room and play on a tuba, and from that they had a whole new crop of tuba players and I taught them how to play tuba.
Well, that's pretty good.
It was cool.
Had no formal training, and yet you picked it up and taught them.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. Where did you go to college?
Marshall University in Huntington, West Virginia.
And what time period was that?
That would have been...
I think you told me 63 to 67. Is that
correct.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
So in the really turbulent times for the country,
oh yes,
you were in college. Did you have? Were you a counselor at a camp during the time you were in college too?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And what kind of influence did that have on you?
Probably not as much as I might have thought at the time, but it was. I was a counselor in a wilderness camp for any inner-city children out of Louisville over on the riverfront. And while some of them had previous acquaintance with the camp, a lot of them had no concept of being in a wilderness area. They were urban kids. There were a lot of caves along that campsite. It was scrap ground. It was land that couldn't be farmed, which is why someone gave it to
Very rugged.
the settlement house.
Yeah. And you were involved in the settlement house in Louisville too, I think you said. Now, did you get involved in some political activity when you were in college?
Yes. I was part of a local civil rights organization that was tiny, And I also
Was Marshall a liberal environment, or?
it's a regional state college, a state university, and so no, I wouldn't characterize it as that. There were some liberal instructors and professors, but no, overall not.
So-
It basically was a state teachers college that was converted to a university.
Okay. Now, I believe you said you had some ROTC experience, and not
Well,
not the normal kind, but you had an experience
no,
with ROTC.
as a part of the Campus Christian Center, which I had some leadership role, I led people in a praying on the ROTC field over the Vietnam War. That wasn't well received, actually.
This is an anti-war activity, right?
Well, opposed to the war, yes.
Right, right. And you said it was a campus Christian group
Center.
that you were involved in?
Yes.
So you continued on with your
Yes,
religious activity even through college.
correct, yeah.
And do you think that had a big influence on maybe why you continued down the path that you did ultimately?
I'm not sure that it did. I think that was I sort of stumbled across this path, and it wasn't anything I saw as being preordained or being essential or necessary, but it seems to me like it was a logical progression, yes.
Okay. At the time, it was the right thing to do.
yes.
How did you manage, you didn't go to Vietnam, is that right?
No, I didn't. Through some peculiar circumstances, I didn't, yes.
Well, you were fortunate then.
Yes.
In a lot of ways. Did you, I believe you attended grad school, is that right, after college?
At the University of Tennessee.
And what were you studying?
Political science.
That's a real useful degree. You can either teach or probably go on to some other thing. It's just like getting an undergraduate degree in political
I'm not sure how
science.
useful a degree
No,
it is,
I'm being
actually.
facetious, obviously.
Yes.
It's something you either teach or you're going to have to go on and do something else.
Right, correct. Yeah.
Right. So what was your plan?
Well, actually, I think I was planning to teach. I had a fellowship from the Ford Foundation in college teaching, paying part of my tuition. Graduate assistantship paid more than that.
So you were doing some teaching.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was, and probably planned to do that. I had great plans for my doctorate, my thesis, but dissertation, which never came about.
I see. And this was at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville?
Correct,
Okay.
yeah.
Did you have an internship while you were in graduate school with a community action?
Yes, with the
group?
Southern Regional Education Board, yes.
And what did you do with them?
I was assigned to the Knoxville, Knox County Community Action Agency, and they put me on some project dealing with their management information systems. Now, realize that at that time, we're not talking about computers. They were
Right.
talking about literally hand sorting management information. This was before.
It's like the card catalog.
Yeah,
right?
before they, yes, well, exactly right. There actually were cards that had a McBee card system where you would interview someone and cut slots in the card, and then you could put a rod down through the card and pull out all the teenage boys that were involved.
I mean,
in that
literally,
kind of
it's like an early computer system.
yeah,
of sorts.
well, there was no computer to it.
Right.
This was before even the typing was manual.
But it was sorting. It was a sorting.
Yes,
thing
right.
that you did, yeah.
It didn't last very
No.
long.
Did you find that interesting?
Well, I produced a paper about how the efficiency of that system could be improved. However, I mean, that was an irrelevant situation because it was overwhelmed by actually computerization.
Yeah.
And,
By the time you got your paper out,
yeah,
the computers were
it was irrelevant.
starting to do it.
Yeah.
Now, did you get involved in some sort of paraprofessional program, or was that?
Yeah, yes. When I was in law school, and I went to law school.
So that was later. Well, before we get there,
All right.
there's an interesting story about how you managed to decide to go to law school.
Well,
I thought
it's
it was
actually,
interesting.
okay, I was involved, one of the things I did at that Community Action Agency where I later worked for 5 years, I was involved in designing and implementing what they called manpower training programs. They're basically employment training programs.
For underprivileged young
Yes,
people,
yes,
right?
Yeah, they were, West Virginia at that point had a so-called Happy Pappies program, which trained coal miners who were out of work to be MIG welders so that they could build personnel carriers to be used in Vietnam. So the idea was that there might be some other things that they could do other than MIG welding. And also that some women could do. There were a lot of women on welfare.
Right.
Some of whom had, when we started playing with that, we discovered several of them had 3 years of college. And so all you really needed to do was pay their tuition along with their welfare benefits.
So they could complete their education.
Right.
And, yeah.
So one of the big pushes was to design paraprofessional programs and to take people necessarily not off of a college track, but onto a track where they could earn some decent money. And one of those things, the one that you're talking about particularly, was about paralegals, which,
That was new at that point.
yes, there were a lot of law firms who used their senior legal secretaries just as if paralegals.
Right.
However, they hadn't thought of it that way. And
I'm sure they
also-
didn't pay him that way either.
No, they did not pay them that way at all. But they were sending them out to get books, bring law books, find a case, which are things that paralegals can do. So in the design of that program, we cut a contract with the University of Tennessee Law School, which the U.S. Department of Labor, we were the subcontractor for them, was encouraging us to do. And in that case, I met with the dean, Dean Pendiger, at that point of UT Law School. We negotiated a contract, and at the conclusion of that period, we shook hands, and he told me I ought to go to law school. And I told him, no, I had a job.
Didn't he ask you who drafted the contract?
Well, yeah.
He thought it was such a good
yeah,
job
I
that he
left that
decided
part
you
out,
should
yeah.
go to law school. I think you're being a little modest today.
There was one part of the contract he did not approve of. So I took it back. I rewrote it. I took it back to him and had it typed up. Took it back to him. He said, that's fine. And he asked me, who drafted this? And Tony Brown, the county law director, did he write this? I said, no. And he said, well, who wrote this? And I told him I did it. He said, well, this is exactly right. He signed the contract. That's when he told me that I should go to law school. And I told him no. But I did take his encouragement to take the LSAT test that summer, and
Just on a whim.
Yes, on a whim. Yes, very much on a whim, and just for curiosity. I got my scores back. I don't remember at all what they were, but I called him, as I had told him that I would call him when I got the scores, and he said yes. Yes, I got your scores this morning. And I said, okay, well, I'm not sure I know what that means. He says, well, it means the school starts in 2 weeks.
Most of us didn't get into law school like that. You do understand that, right?
I know.
We didn't get invited by the deans.
Yes, recruited by the dean. It was
Right,
cool.
Right.
So I went, but with the understanding that, well, an implicit understanding that I would continue working. Although,
Which
as I
is-
understood, first-year students were supposed to work.
I was going to say that's very unusual. I mean, first-year law students at UT and anywhere really carry a full load, and it's pretty hectic. But you decided you were going to not only do that, but you were also going to work full-time.
Yeah, well, I didn't end up working full-time. I dropped down to 20 hours a week during
That's
the
still a
regular
lot.
school
Yeah,
year.
that's a lot.
Yeah, I was the contract officer, though,
Sure.
for the law school, in charge of surveillance of their performance, which was interesting.
That is interesting. And while you were in law school, Did you continue on with the paralegal class or course?
Yes, well, I didn't teach it in the class. There are a number of people, Patsy Cottrell, Ross Alderman, there were several other people, Bill Farmer, I think, who taught classes in Crayford Gray, who the law school recruited specifically to do this program. But I monitored and was very involved. I was involved with the students in the paralegal program, not with the instruction.
So was the paralegal course, was it run out of the law school, or was it?
Yes, okay. And then I ended up.
I think actually down in the basement, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. Yeah, and down near where Miller had a clinic, and I ended up giving some lectures for the Knoxville Bar Association about job restructuring for paralegals, and apparently that was well attended. I remember a lot of people being there for that.
And so that continued on while you were. Did you work there the whole time you were in law school?
Yes, absolutely. Okay. Yeah.
And I do remember Patsy Cottrell worked down there. Did she run the program for a while too?
She might have. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but you said you
we're
met.
talking about Judge
Exactly.
Cottrell. Yes,
exactly. Yeah. I mean, just for those who will be watching this, you were in law school with people like Bill Farmer, who's a well-known lawyer here in Nashville, who was the federal public defender for a while, and an assistant attorney general. And you're talking about Patsy Cottrell, who a well-known lawyer in town, but she was also former Court of Appeals judge.
Oh, and you and your husband.
Well, we were there too.
Yes,
we're a little bit, a couple of years behind some of y'all. And Ross Alderman, who was the public defender, good, just an excellent lawyer. So it was an interesting time to be there, to be in law school. And you mentioned Crayford Gray. He was a professor at law school. He's sort of the, I would describe him as sort of the, well, I was going to say nutty professor. He wasn't nutty at all, but he would be a little absent-minded because he had so many things going on.
He did, and he frequently wrote poetry.
He did. He did. He worked in the legislature, state legislature, taught a course down here.
Yes.
He was involved in a lot of things.
Yes, he was.
Taught ethics and professionalism in law school. That's who I had my class with.
He had a different view of ethics,
legal
ethics, that a lot of other people had.
He did. So it was, those were good times. I'm not sure, not all lawyers in Nashville would know Crayford Gray, but a lot of people who, now that we have a lot of lawyers from UT, there are a lot who would know Crayford Gray. So it was at that time that you became good friends with Bill Farmer and Patsy and Ross.
Yes,
I think.
sure.
Okay. I keep calling her Patsy. I have that. I mean,
Patricia Jean.
Right. That's not, that we all knew her that way, even though she's Judge Cottrell. So you went through law school, helped support yourself by working part-time. Then you got ready to take the bar exam. Was there anything interesting about the bar exam? More so than just normal stress that we go through.
Yes, the first of the exam was the Multi-State, and the
what year was this?
This would have been early '76. The winter exam was '76. I had just graduated in December of '75. So took the Multi-State, and everyone came back the next day with their blue books ready to take the state law portion and
the essay portion.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, in the state law portion also, but someone stood up, assembled the group, and said the examination was indefinitely postponed, that he was a law examiner, and the examination, the questions were in circulation in Memphis, and for that reason they were postponing indefinitely the exam, which caused great consternation amongst everyone, including people whose jobs were dependent on passing that examination.
And so what happened?
The exam was rescheduled. Several months later, it was, I think, my recollection is April or May, and my impression was it had an extremely high pass rate.
I would not realize it had been rescheduled. So all of you all had gotten ready, studied hard, as we all do, totally stressed out like many law students or former law students are about the bar exam, and they cancel it and reschedule it. So you got to go through the whole stress. And as you say, some people's jobs were dependent on whether or not they passed the bar. That was an interesting time. But you got past it.
Yes.
And moved on. And what did you do after you passed the bar?
Try to decide what options I was going to take. I certainly could remain in Knoxville. I could continue my work with community action, practice law on the side. There was a very short-lived movement amongst. This was a community action agency, so it was organized in many of the communities, and I was well known. I had helped a lot of teenagers get into college during those years. So there was a short-lived movement to nominate me as a brand new lawyer whose ink wasn't dried to be juvenile court judge.
Oh, in Knoxville.
Yeah, and that didn't seem like a real good idea as a first career step. But I was concerned. I wanted to find out if I could practice law, and I did it the hard way. I knew if I stayed in Knoxville, I'd be tempted about the salary that was guaranteed me, and I thought I really wouldn't practice law. I would concentrate on these other things. So I decided I would move to Nashville, although I knew no one here.
You knew no one here. You didn't have a job.
No.
You left a place where you did have a job. And
Yeah.
so you made an interesting choice of where to go. Where did you end up?
Someone referred me to, I think it was Grayford Gray, referred me to Denny Cheatham and Rose Palermo.
Also famous lawyers here in Nashville, longtime lawyers.
Yeah, and I visited them, and they had a front parlor that they rented to me. I was not part of their firm.
They had an office out on Music Row, as I recall, in an old house.
43 Music Square West. That's on 16th Avenue. It's still there.
It is.
Nice brick building surrounded by.
But it was an old house.
So yeah,
It was a home, actually.
Yes, and
So they had a parlor available.
yeah, the parlor was in the front, and the window looked out on 16th Avenue. Right across the street was an apartment that presumably, I understand, Chris Christopherson used to rent. I don't know. But the other side of my office were a set of French doors. If they opened up, if one was so inclined, to the office of Rose Palermo, who is sometimes was very, very spirited and
Colorful.
very colorful and loud, and so she would sometimes
effective.
Every once in a while, I'd be sitting there doing something, and the doors would swing open, and she would ask me if I could do something, if I could go to probate court with her, instead for her tomorrow to change the name from a Russian name for a guy who wanted to be a country music singer, and to make it something, to anglicize it, make it a South name. And we had a lot of trouble with that, actually.
You did.
The probate judge wasn't fond of
Is that
those
Judge
kinds.
Luton?
Yes, it was.
Interesting. So, yeah, I'm sure that did Rose or Denny ask you to do things frequently, just related to their own cases?
Yes,
And they had interesting clientele.
Occasionally, they would abate part of my rent, so that was good.
Yes. Well, and Rose represented a lot. I'm sure they both represented people on Music Row, and
Yeah.
Rose did a lot of high-powered divorce work.
Oh, she certainly did. Yeah.
Probably still does. I
Yes.
shouldn't say did.
Yeah, she was.
But that would end up with a lot of miscellaneous extra things that needed to be done, I'm sure.
It did.
Did you end up meeting some celebrities while you were there?
I think I did. I don't recall I recall a couple of them, but it occurs to me that
Probably shouldn't talk
Yeah, I
about
shouldn't
it.
be
Got
talking
it.
about
Okay.
them,
No
yes.
problem. So you also worked with Joan Hamner out there, I think.
I did. Yes. Mm-hmm.
you had some interesting cases, I think. Maybe what did you? You had a case of a Chief Red Wing.
Yes.
Was that? Did you have that when you were still with Rose and Denny?
I
say with them. You
I
were not.
began the case when I was still in that private practice. I finished the case when I was in the public defender's office.
Right.
So I began the case because the case that happened, the crime, happened very near their office, and actually,
in an alley or something. The body.
yeah, in an alley behind. I'm thinking it's behind BMI, and actually it was on Thanksgiving Day. It was raining. I went to work that day. Now I was going to go somewhere else to have Thanksgiving dinner for the evening, but I went into work, and I remember seeing the police cars out there and wandered over and asked them what was going on. They said there'd been a death, and so later I got a phone call asking me to represent a person in that, and I had agreed to do that, and I did some really good work in preparing the case. And my understanding was that they were going to be good for the fee, this third-party payor, and they said, well, it was a first-degree murder charge, and they said, well, we'll pay you whatever it takes, up to $200.
That was very lucrative fee.
Yeah.
No.
So
Not.
I did not proceed further.
Right.
But then later, I caught the case when it got in criminal court.
You were appointed, right?
I
So you did get
was.
some minor compensation. And it sort of, the interesting part was not so much the case, although it was a murder case, and I think you tried to suppress a confession, and it was not suppressed. He either was found guilty or pled guilty. But on appeal, eventually, they overturned his conviction.
They did.
I think the Court of Criminal Appeals, or maybe the Supreme Court, said that they were convinced maybe he did do the murder.
Yes.
Nevertheless, the conviction, the confession should not come
was
in.
the primary evidence against him, and undoubtedly it was coerced.
Right. But the other interesting part about it was that he refused parole. He wanted to stay in prison.
Yes, he did.
And you continued to represent him on that. Is that right?
Yeah, I did.
Until the Court of Appeals finally just said, you're out. We've overturned this decision. You're out now.
Yes. I made the day that the opinion came down, reversing his conviction. I was then in the public defender's office, and Walt Kurtz was the public defender, and he said, "Oh, we need to celebrate." So we went out and celebrated, and then I realized later in the evening that I hadn't told my client.
Oh, God.
So I went out to the prison in the dark. Someone gave me a ride because I shouldn't have been driving.
And this is probably at the old prison, is that right?
Oh, yeah, there's the walls, yes.
Right, the walls,
Yeah.
the castle.
So I go in there, and they say, what are you doing here? I got up a bar cart, and I say, I need to see this. You can't see this inmate. And I say, yes, I do need to see him. He's free. And I'll hold up the opinion. I'm waving a copy of the opinion to them, and they bring him out, and all these guys, a whole bunch of people at the captain's station around there watching this, and I tell him what's happened, and he cries, I hug him,
So another celebration.
Yes, and then he's walking back over there, and then only later, the next day, did I realize that actually he wasn't free, that the mandate hadn't issued.
Right.
And that the
It's one of those minor things.
state had 30 days in which to...
One of those minor things that we younger criminal lawyers learn. It just takes us a little while to learn that.
Yeah, so he did get out later, yes.
But in the meantime, he refused parole because he didn't want to live the sort of straight and narrow lifestyle that was required. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
He said he'd rather be in prison than not be able to drink, I think was the quote in the paper.
Yes,
Right.
he actually had testified that, he had testified that his ancestry was Aztec Paiute. Not apparently aware that there hadn't been Aztecs for several centuries.
Okay.
All right.
He just sprang out from the head of a Phoenix or something.
Something
Yeah.
you read,
Okay,
yes.
right.
All right.
Gotcha, okay. You also got involved, I think, maybe when you were still with Rose and Denny, in Friends of Spencer, and you ended up with a case of Regina Rowe. I guess that's like Regina Doe, or,
Yeah, it was a pseudonym,
yeah,
yes.
right.
Joan Hamner had some responsibility of that. Friends of Spencer Youth Center had a team of lawyers who went out on every Wednesday night, and now this was before there had been significant juvenile court reforms. And
Right.
so
A lot of these people didn't have lawyers. They
they had never had
Right,
a lawyer.
right.
There were some of them.
Yet they were incarcerated by the
They,
state.
they were being held. It was particularly prominent in the rural counties, Memphis and Shelby.
Well, they were
Shelby
incarcerated by
County.
people who weren't even lawyers.
Correct.
Judges who were not
Yeah.
lawyers back in
And
the
they've
day.
been convicted by some non-lawyer judges.
Right.
So there was a lot of habeas corpus work that was there to be done.
And I believe there was a clinic over at Vanderbilt, as I recall.
Yeah, David Kozlowski was also involved in that.
Very involved in Andy Shukoff was involved in that. Later
And
became a
Russell
juvenile
Herbe
judge.
with legal services. We
Right.
sort of took turns about who was going to handle what case.
Yeah.
And then I got a call from a lady who told me that she was aware of a female being held in solitary confinement down at Highland, what was then called Highland Rim School for Girls at Tullahoma. Wasn't much of a school, and she was being held in solitary confinement, and I decided I'd go see her and collect some paperwork, get some releases from her, and in fact it proved to be true. So we filed that lawsuit against the I guess it was the Department of Youth Development then, I think.
But under the Department of Human Services.
Yeah, it was a habeas corpus. Davis
Right.
County Chancery, C. Allen High was the chancellor. When I filed the case, I didn't do skeletal pleadings. I tended to put the whole story in there, and
It was a speaking pleading.
oh yeah, and it was picked up by the Tennessean, by Kirk Loggins, who
If there was anything interesting in a case, Kurt, or peculiar, Kurt liked to pick up on it.
he did, and so that the case was had a successful outcome. Yes.
She was not only released from solitary confinement, but she was released from custody.
The chancellor, the second day of the trial, the hearing, I didn't know quite what I was into. I go up to the Chancery Court Division, and there's a sign on the door that says, "Due to the public interest in this case, it's been moved to one of the criminal court rooms on the 6th floor of the old courthouse."
You thought they were talking about some other case, I guess.
Yeah, they weren't. There was interest in it. But yes, the chancellor, the second day of the hearing, speaks to the guardian ad litem and says, "Where do you want her to go?" Talking about my client. And so she actually was released from the courtroom.
Like she was in the court for the hearing and the judge released her at that moment.
Yes. Want to know where she was going to go? Where she had some people to pick her up and take her
You've had some
back to
interesting
Clarksville.
victories.
Yeah.
Not your, what I would call typical case or your ordinary case. Not your slip and fall or car accident kind of case, but other interesting cases with interesting twists,
Yes.
shall we say. I think you were involved in another, maybe it was the Chief Red Wing, but was there another murder case that you worked on that ended up getting you a call from Jim Havron?
Well, you're talking about when the public defender then?
Yes, yeah, right. And Jim
Yeah,
Havron
okay.
was
Well,
the part-time public defender.
Actually, it was this case.
Okay.
It's the same case. Okay. I did not know quite how the system went in General Sessions' criminal side. And I knew the case was docketed for a preliminary hearing And that was the
I mean,
point
you
I
were working
needed.
on you're working on a murder case.
Yeah,
This
I was
is
working
like-
that case until I found out that the fee was going to cap at $200.
Even though you had not done any murder cases or criminal cases
No,
before.
I had
It's
not.
like, this is like jumping in the deep end, in
Yes.
other words, okay?
Yes, right. So,
Or getting pushed in the deep end, I'm not sure which.
so anyway, I didn't realize I didn't need to withdraw from the representation because I'd never entered an appearance. But I went to court to try to do that, and everyone stared at me.
Wasn't a court of record.
No, general sessions, no. And so the judge says, okay, well, all right, well, I'm going to appoint the public defender. I say, fine. So I passed a card over and said, I've got some materials. An investigator from the public defender's office came out, and I gave him photographs of the defendant that were made by the sheriff with blood, trickles of blood running down the side of his face. And I
Did you find a witness who had seen him right before he had been interviewed too?
Yes, that was, yes.
You don't get that very often.
No, you don't. Actually, the witness who had seen him and talked with him literally an hour before the episode was a doctor of psychology who was having an AA group at the Veterans Hospital, and my client had gone to the group at the invitation of one of the relatives of the decedent. He said, "Let's go," and so they went to this group, Dr. Anderson, if I recall correctly, and he remembered this because he remembered saying, "Oh, I'm so sorry. You've had this loss, and your best friend has been murdered, and so do you see blood running down his face?" No. Was he intoxicated? No, of course not. No, he was at an AA meeting. And so that was 1 hour before he got booked into the jail with blood running down the side of his face. I had the photos. I had an interview with Dr. Anderson.
So you gave all that to the investigator.
Yeah. And
Do you remember who the investigator was?
Mike Wood.
Okay.
I think he was a former police officer.
So
I
you
think apparently it made a good impression on Jim Heffern, who was the public defender, and he called me on New Year's Day to offer me a job.
Had some interesting encounters with people that have taken you sort of in a different direction. I mean, you had the law school one with Dean Penniger, and then your introduction to Rose Palermo and Denny Cheatham, and that took you down a sort of a pathway. And now your introduction to public defending. And so did you take the job that Havern offered you?
I did. I have.
It was a part-time job, so you could keep doing
it was
whatever you wanted to do.
It was a part-time job, yes. Part-time assistant public defenders at that time, and had always been up to that until Walt Kurtz got elected public defender and took office.
78 or 80?
That would. Yes, I think that
78.
was. No, 70. Yes, it was 78. You're right. That's correct. Yes, September of 78. He got elected, and his initial position was that there would be no more part-time people. They would be full-time, and they would be receiving the same salary that the part-timers had gotten.
You get the same amount of money, but you're going to work twice as much.
Well, yeah, but so I was one of the holdovers. I was one of the two holdovers who Walt retained.
Who was the other one?
Now was Nemo. But the other
Another
other
famous, well-respected lawyer here in town.
the other assistant public defenders at that point who Walt hired were Jim Weatherly, Mariah Wooten, Rich McGee, Joan Hamner for the juvenile
Randy
court.
Lefevre?
Randy Lefevre, I'd forgotten. Yes, that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, we talked about all these people. Yeah, I think that pretty much covers it. And all the people you talked about were either, well, Joan and Randy worked in juvenile court, and they worked there long time and were very experienced. And the others were are well-known. I mean, Rich McGee's well-known criminal defense lawyer. Weatherly is certainly. He later he was elected to public defender. So, yeah, it was a good group of folks that you were working with. So how long did you work with Walter Kurtz in the public defender's office? Not too long, because I came over there in '82 and you were gone, I think, by then.
Yes, I was there. I think I left in '80 to try my hand in private practice again. That was another mistake. I
mean, why did you decide to leave?
Never made any money out of private practice.
No, not if you're taking cases for no money and then they offer you $200 to do a murder case. You know, you would not have.
So I left then and then later came back. But yeah.
Let's see.
Well, speaking of bad episodes of private practice, and not in this episode, but later, I took a death penalty case for $2,000 cash front with promise to pay more. I never got anything more. I tried that case, went through the death sentencing, appealed to the Court of Criminal Appeals, appealed it to the Tennessee Supreme Court and argued it in both courts, and got myself into the United States Supreme Court and petitioned for certiorari. I was saying $2,000.
Wow.
I didn't.
Is that when you were in private practice?
I was up on a deadline for filing at the Supreme Court, and I wasn't clear whether they was talking about their actual physical receipt or their posting of the document. And so I decided I would take a plane, fly the early flight, the 7 a.m. flight from Nashville to Washington to file the petition. And so I go in, and the fun part of that was I get out of the airport, get to the cab stand, and everyone's fantasy, I get to say, "Take me to the United States Supreme Court."
Right away.
Yeah, they did. And I go up there, and they're a little aghast at what I handed them, and say, this is stapled. It can't be stapled. This needs to be bound. And it's like, didn't know that. Where can I take it to get it bound? And I say, well, there's a print shop on the other side of town that does this. And she stares, she says, now, you're doing this is a death penalty case, and you're doing it for free. I say, yes, ma'am. And she says, okay. So just a minute. She goes over, makes a phone call, comes back over and says, all right, now, I want you to leave the building with your papers, and next door is the Library of Congress. Head to the steps of the Library of Congress, and on the left-hand side of the steps, on the first level, there's a small door. There's a gentleman who will be waiting for you at that door. So I do what she tells me, and I go, and there's a man standing at the door, and a black man, I remember, and he said,
"Are you sure this is not a movie?"
Oh, yeah, it sounds like a movie. And he says, come on in here. This is some case about a guy in Tennessee who's going to be electrocuted. And I said, yes. And he said, okay. He said, oh my, these are not right. Turned out it was the bindery of the Library of Congress. And so
That's who bound your documents?
Yeah, he took them out, he bound them, and he actually even rolled them up. I didn't realize this, rolled them up and tied them with ribbons and tubes and put one tube in each of the justices' carts. And so he gives me these, and I go back over, and
oh my gosh!
And they say, "This is wonderful. Thank you very much." And say, "Now, you're newly admitted to the Supreme Court. You obviously have not been introduced. You've not been here before." And I said, "No." And she said, "Well, go on upstairs, and see if the guard will let you see the courtroom. So he not only let me see the courtroom, there was no one there. It's before the tourists. He takes me back into the courtroom and says, "Now, when they grant your petition for such a right, here's where you'll stand. Stand
wow.
over there, and then there's the red light." That was sort of really cool.
Yeah, a better tour than the ordinary tour they give to tourists.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's cool. So did they grant cert in your case?
No, they did not, sir.
They did not.
Yes,
Too bad.
yes.
Wow. Which case was this?
Cecil Johnson. He was later. He's the last person in Tennessee who was executed.
Yeah. Sorry. Wow. That's an amazing story. Were you in the public defender's office or were you in private practice?
I was in private practice then.
Wow. Yeah, you've taken on some very weighty, and by weighty I mean not just legal issues, but issues that really prey on your soul and your character over the years, like the Johnson case and others. How have you managed to sort of keep your you have a pretty happy outlook on life generally. I've known you a long time, and
yes, we have known each other a long
we
time.
have, and we're in the same Sunday school class now, so I see you pretty much every week or almost every week. You're there every week. I'm not necessarily there every week, and you seem to have a pretty happy outlook. How have you managed to keep it up? Because you've handled some heavy work over the years.
Well, I have, but yeah, there's no question about what it's a calling, and I would use that word both. Well, in all the context of it, this is what I'm supposed to do.
Yeah, you can't avoid it.
I do it marginally well.
I would say I would disagree with you on that. You do it extremely well.
But it's something that needs to be done.
Well, thank goodness that you do it.
All right.
Let me say that. And I'm sure that there are a lot of people in Nashville and around the state and maybe around the country who feel the same way, that we appreciate it. And I don't mean to end the interview with that because we've got some other things to talk about, but because we got off on the Johnson case and death penalty cases, it's just, that's something I've never done. And so I can't imagine the emotional involvement that
it's great.
that there is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I know that. So we talked a couple of times about other jobs you had. You've worked for the state.
I did.
Once or twice, I think.
Actually,
Maybe 3 times.
I was legislative legal counsel for one term of the General Assembly.
I didn't realize that.
And then later, later I was with the State Department of Health and Environment then, and I was there in their legal department. I was the deputy general counsel for a while. I was there for 5 years.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize it was so long.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've been in and out of private practice. When's the last time you were in private practice?
Now.
Oh, now. Right.
I retired from the Metro Public Defender's
That's right.
Office.
You're supposed to be retired.
And I'm semi-retired.
Right.
I try to keep my caseload to less than 10.
So you're married to...
Pamela Auble, a forensic neuropsychologist.
And how did you meet Pam?
In her office when I was trying
I was gonna say, which
to
case?
study over retaining her in a death penalty case. Yes.
Which case was it?
That was
If you remember.
yes.
Well,
That was Paul Dennis Reed.
oh, that was another. Wow. You've handled so many cases that I've been aware of and have forgotten about. And I'm sure you haven't, but so that you met her involvement in the case. I know that you hired her ultimately.
I did. Well,
Right.
yes. Mm-hmm.
She worked. I know she worked in there, and then you all got married.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And have you continued to work together, or since you got married, you've not worked together?
No, that would be
Would not.
inappropriate.
Right, would not work.
Yes.
Would not work. So we have talked about a lot of different lawyers here in Nashville, sort of what I would call the left-wing mafia of lawyers in Nashville.
I didn't know there was one.
Well, there's not. There's
Okay,
not. Just
all right.
I say that jokingly. Who would you say have been the biggest influences in your career?
Well, all right, I would give something to Walt Kurtz. He knew what he was doing. He was knowledgeable, inordinately knowledgeable. I sometimes would try to find advance sheets in the public defender library. When Walt was the public defender, they'd be in Walt's office, and they'd have hand scribbled over them. He'd read all of the advance sheets. He'd make notes on the advance sheets. He would tear pages out of the advance sheets and then file them under subject matter hearings, topics, so he could always go to his cabinet and pluck out the latest cases on any particular issue. Plus, he had a good discipline. I would give him a lot of credit for that.
And I would say he hired good people.
Oh, yeah. Yes, I do. Yeah.
Who else?
Well, I'm not sure, actually.
Well, I'll tell you what
Yes.
you told me before was Gordon Bonneman.
Oh,
Great
yes.
influence.
Well, that's true. Thank you so much for prompting me.
I'll
Yes,
hold up the sheet here. And
Yeah,
I'll remind you of some of the people we talked about.
Yes, I would like to say the same thing again. Yes, Gordon Bonneman, certainly. Russ Overby.
And why? What was your connection to those two?
Gordon was literally everyone's mentor, whether he liked it or not. And I remember even on juvenile habeas corpus, meeting Gordon in the legal services office early on a Saturday morning where he had been at work for some period of time and getting his counsel as to look over the pleadings and his making recommendations.
That wasn't necessarily his specialty, but he just was
Yes.
knowledgeable about how to draft pleadings, and he really had
correct.
good ideas. And
He did,
was
yeah.
somebody you could bounce ideas off of.
Yes, he was good. He was also very good about understanding strengths and weaknesses of cases. I worked later with him, and I took a sabbatical from the public defender's office, and I worked with Tennessee Justice Center for several months when they were in heavy-duty federal litigation. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think you mentioned Joan Hamner.
Yes, Joan, who I heard from recently, by the way.
Last I heard, she was on a sailboat somewhere. Is she still sailing?
No, she's not. She was became the premier juvenile court lawyer, certainly in Nashville.
Extraordinary.
And actually, she won the Livingston Hall Award from the American Bar Association for outstanding work at juvenile justice. And then, as you say, she hung up her shingle, sold her house, bought a sailboat, sailed the Caribbean, captained excursions for other people, where she would do the cooking and captain the boat. Now she's selling real estate in Chattanooga.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yes, it is. That's not my career path.
Right. Well, I would not have thought Joan would do that. That's interesting. But what was her influence on you?
Partially exuberance and partially being dogged.
Perseverance.
Yes, we would occasionally read each other's pleadings, and there's one story I think I mentioned to you about Joan. When the American Bar Association came to town, they had their the person who was in charge of their juvenile justice was visiting with Joan, and Joan says, "Oh, let's go out to lunch." Well, that was always a big deal for her. So she said that she would take people out to lunch, and you have a casual meal, and you take some time talking about it, and then everybody go back to work frantically. So she had put this person in her car. She had a Saab at that point, one of the few Saabs working in Nashville. So she said, I think she was going to take this woman from D.C. over to Sweats. And she said, "Do you mind if I just stop and serve a subpoena?" And the housing project.
I'd forgotten this.
Sure, certainly. So Joan drives her into the housing project, and Joan gets the address, and she gets out of the car, and she got a subpoena in her hand, and she's greeted by a kid who's playing out there, and who knows her, and she says, "Oh, I'll bet you heard about that rape yesterday." And she says, "Yes, I am." She says, "Oh, my sister over there saw the whole thing." And Joan says, "Oh, really? Let's go talk to your sister."
Oh, my God.
And so the American Bar Association lady's jaw is dropping
Right.
At that experience.
Yes, I bet. Probably had, there was no question who was going to get the award after that lunch.
Yeah,
I
I knew it wasn't.
You also mentioned Rose Palermo.
Yes,
How was Rose?
She had a love of life that I've never been anywhere near reaching. She, even in litigation, in spirited litigation, she found enjoyment in it, and so she could see the bright side of things that I never saw.
Definitely full of life.
Yes.
And spirited. That's a good way to describe her. That's right. So you mentioned that you're semi-retired. I mean, my observations of you is between your volunteer work and your actual work in court or casework, you're working pretty full time. It looks like to me.
I'm working a lot. Yes.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about the work you do with NOAA. That's something you're very dedicated to, I know.
Yeah.
So what is NOAA?
Nashville Organized for Action and Hope. It is an affiliation of, I think, 63 religious congregations, social action agencies, people interested in social justice kinds of issues, focusing primarily on affordable housing, economic equity, criminal justice, and a fourth area that I can't recall. So I've been involved in that since the beginning of the organization, and still am.
Right. And what other are there other volunteer activities? That's the big one. You take a lot of activities.
That takes a lot. I'm on a couple of small boards. The what's called the Golden Cross Foundation board, which provides money for activities of churches concerning seniors, and devoted to them, doing things like building walkways and putting in sound systems in churches. I'm on the board of the Family Reconciliation Center. I do such volunteer work as is asked for Open Table Nashville. One of their favorite things is to, whenever an encampment is being closed, I'll end up representing the encampment. Now, usually there's very little that can be done except going there and talking with people and meeting with them, talking with them about what might happen, how should they respond, what would happen if you get arrested, what would be the process.
So you're providing a legal clinic, basically.
Yeah, in the streets. Yeah, practical advice like,
Yeah.
if you smoke marijuana, do not have it on your person when a police officer is trying to evict you from the camp. So, I mean, small things, but
Yeah.
people seem to appreciate that.
Yeah, well, good.
Understanding
Good, I would hope
it.
so.
Take some of the fear out of it.
Sure, sure. Well, providing information to people
Yeah.
is usually comforting. I mean, there are some people who don't want information, but
Yeah.
that's great. And your casework, you're just doing some, you're doing some criminal defense
I
work.
am, yes. I think I have 8 clients right now, and all of them are charged with, all except one of them are charged with murder.
Oh, my goodness.
The-
Well, that's
the-
a big deal.
The 8th one is one of the moral protesters from last year.
One of the,
One of the moral protesters who was involved last year.
on the Capitol?
Well, he wasn't at the Capitol. He
Okay.
was down at the courthouse.
Okay, gotcha,
Yeah.
gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you've got an interesting group of things that you're doing, a lot to manage.
Increasingly, I'm finding that I'm getting appointed, and I'm not interested in more appointments, by the way, but I'm finding that I get appointed as successor counsel, meaning that in one of the cases that I have now, the guy's had 5 previous lawyers.
Oh, dear.
And sometimes I can help, and maybe I can remedy the problem they've been having, but some of these are very difficult
Well,
clients.
sure, they're challenging. If they could, they wouldn't have gone through 5 lawyers if they were not
Yeah,
challenging.
and I can understand that maybe some of the lawyers didn't give them the attention they needed, or didn't answer their questions, or didn't give them a copy of the pretrial discovery so that they could peruse that. They didn't listen to them.
Right.
Uh,
They didn't
so
spend the time with
maybe.
them that you maybe will do.
Yeah,
Well, that's challenging. What you do is very challenging. I mean, you've had a long career, and I think it's admirable that you continue on. So let me just say that I appreciate what you've done, and I'm sure those people who get to watch this will appreciate what you've done. Is there anything I've forgotten to ask you today, Mike?
absolutely not. No,
You think not?
I've
Okay.
You've asked me every single
We've-
thing you
we've-
could possibly have asked me.
We've covered everything. Well, good. I've done my direct examination well then.
Okay, you have.
It's been a pleasure to talk with you again today. As I said earlier, we've known each other a long time, and but it's fun to hear the details of your career and your life. And I'm sure those who watch this will enjoy it too.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Bye.